Can you guys hear me? No, I can't hear you. Let's see. I think I just heard something. Maybe I can get you now. You're frozen. Nothing. I'm going to. I'm gonna send you guys an. I'm gonna generate another link for you guys. Maybe come back in. All right, I got you now. Try talking now. No. I got you now. What's going on here? Let's see. The full volume. What is going on? I'm just going to send you a Zoom and then we'll try that. And then I'll screen record it here. All right, I think we should all be here now. I think you're muted. Let's see. Can you hear me? Nope. You can't hear me. How about now? Okay. Okay. So we'll get this going. So I got my guests here, the Collins brothers. Uh, are you keeping your video off? Okay, cool. No worries. All right, so I'm here today with the Collins brothers, the authors of Invoking the Beyond on the UFOs and also the Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship here, which is an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century. And this is a really good book if anybody is interested in what's going on right now and why we have like a Dr. Fauci that is the science and what's going on in politics. I would highly recommend this. And I wanted to really get into this section on neoconservatism here as something that kind of comes out of this whole Enlightenment into the French Revolution and interview them on this and how it's another form of technocracy. So I was thinking we might actually work backwards a little bit and start kind of with how neoconservatism got into the door, then maybe get into what undergirds it. Exactly. Yes. Right. Or something to be integrated if you're willing to accept that. Either you have to have the Gnostic idea, you must transcend this God, you have to reject this God, and still end up in the world that has this theology in it, and it's as if you're still acting out Satanism. Or you think it's acceptable to have this evil in God, then you want to imitate that and integrate this evil the way the Hindus do.
tiered heavenly locales. And in addition to rendering God the Father absolutely transmundane, ontically distant, and divorced from creation, as the deist of the 18th century Enlightenment did. Uh, these cosmologies that the Gnostics constructed also camouflaged this antagonistic metaphysical dualism that the early church would have deemed untenable. But this cosmological divorce leaves both man and nature in a state of absolute autonomy. Neither nature nor man must comply with a divine law because the high God is isolated from creation and can only be known through secret knowledge or gnosis. Nature need not conform to any law but its own. It is not a tangible attestation to the glory of God, as Saint Paul characterizes in the book of Romans, but instead it's an ontologically deficient simulacrum, the fabric of which is as malleable as clay. Likewise, man need not conform to any law but his own. An anthropological doctrine of absolute human plasticity takes shape. Man becomes an absolutely self determining being. He becomes his own creator, a metaphysical proposition that affirms the Gnostic soteriological claim of self salvation. Through gnosis, man reconnects with the high God, discovers his forgotten homogeneity with the divine, and either escapes the confines of this world or even usurps deific powers over it, which you see this sort of usurpation depicted in Asclepius, an ancient source of Gnostic lore. But for all practical purposes, man saves himself because, according to the Gnocio-Hermetic scheme, he remained homoousia with the high God even after his tragic descent into materiality. In fact, all other gods are actually the products of vicarious autotheism, a rather Promethean assertion that we see presented in the Gnostic Gospel of Phillip and reiterated in modernity in the form of Ludwig Feuerbach's anthropomorphic projectionism. But as antiquity segued into modernity, several thinkers would transpose gnosis into the immanent sphere, thereby creating more idealistic strains of Gnosticism. Now, this tide of Gnostic idealism eschewed the explicit cosmological pessimism endemic to many of its antecedent systems. Instead, the new Gnostic systems would express a more utopian attitude towards the world. History, which the ancient Gnostics derided as a symptom of materiality's intrinsic corruption, history was regarded by the ancient Gnostics as a literal terror because history and its flux resulted in perpetual change, and that perpetual change prevented the homogeneity of all creation with God. It gave rise to distinctions and to a world of distinctions, a world of distinct beings, differentiation, which they considered symptomatic of corruption.
So this
But
gets us into the one and the many problem, right?
right, yes. And it also leads to what we'll see with modernity and modernity's view of history. History on the ancient Gnostics was a terror, but with this new Gnosticism that we would see with the opening of modernity, with this new Gnosticism, we'll see that history suddenly becomes a soteriological process by which the world would be redeemed. So, where ancient Gnosticism regarded the physical cosmos as a cosmic abortion, the new Gnosticism viewed the world as a dilapidated habitation in need of renovation. And the renovators were those revolutionaries endowed with gnosis, that is to say, a secret knowledge concerning the shape and form of the future utopia. And gazing the world through the lens of idealistic Gnosticism, modern revolutionaries situated the eschaton, the end of days, within history, thereby rendering it entirely immanent. And herein are the conceptual seeds of several neo-Gnostic systems that transpose the eschaton into the immanent sphere.
And I'd like to bring up one
The
area here too where this really starts to happen. You start with coming out of like Gemestos Platon and everybody like this, and then you see the Munster Rebellion when the Protestants start to break away. When this comes into the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, this Chiliasm and this utopian idea, you see the deists, they wanted to have a new millennium, and so did Robespierre. He had this whole Thermidor where he wanted to be the supreme. He was almost akin to the supreme being that he said he was bringing in.
Yeah, right, right. And this view of they had this view of a world in which the sun would never set,
Yes.
the age of eternal daylight upon humanity.
Would
This
what
Oh,
how
go ahead.
would you like if you could expand on that too and how that actually starts before the Enlightenment with the Rosicrucian Enlightenment? I know John Dee had this idea. So did some of the Catholics that the sun would not when everywhere that the sun was upon at all times was Christian, when the whole world was Christian, they believed that would actually bring in the second coming. So you start to see this. Actually, Dante even has a verse on this. and then it comes through John Dee and the Rosicrucians. He pushed this type of idea, and it ended up influencing like manifest destiny. Correct?
Yeah. This notion, it's a redefined notion of the parousia of the second coming of Jesus Christ. The whole idea of manifest destiny is going to become very important later on as the neocons gain political traction with a faction of the American oligarchy known as the Southern Rim. The Southern Rim the Southern Rim believed in what was called frontierism and the idea that progress, again, they had this kind of enlightenment fixation with progress as being salvific in nature. But the idea that progress was generated by conquering the frontier. So the dilemma becomes, what do you do when you run out of frontier to conquer? What happens when the whole North American continent is yours? And so what they had to do is they began to expand the frontier beyond the confines of the continent, and that's when we get the Vietnam War, and we get the schism, what we call the schism of 67, 68, where the northeastern elites begin to pull away from the people that espoused this frontierism, namely these elites that existed below the 37th parallel in states like Florida, in Louisiana, in Texas, in portions of California, in Nevada. These people began to pull away and became known according to Carl Oglesby coined the term for them, the Southern Rim. And then another book was written that elaborated on what the Southern Rim was by Kirkpatrick Sale. But the Southern Rim would ultimately take up the neoconservative cause and basically imbibe the neoconservatives. And that's where they would gain their primary traction, whereas there would be kind of a violent separation between them and the neoliberals and the northeastern elites, what we would call the eastern liberal establishment.
Right.
Yeah. But at any rate, so we see this redefinition of the parousia, and we see this redefinition of the second coming, the eschaton within these new Gnostic systems, which basically softened the cosmological pessimism of their ancient Gnostic antecedents and revised view of the world. No longer was the world viewed as something to be escaped. It was still viewed in a tacitly docetistic sense as a simulacrum, but it was viewed as something to be redeemed, something to be altered and shaped and changed by those in possession of gnosis. The first of these neo-Gnostic systems was schematized by 12th century Calabrian abbot and hermit Joachim of Fior. Joachim apocalypticized history by configuring it according to this Trinitarian eschatology that he held. Within the framework of Joachim's eschatology, each hypostasis or person of the Trinity represented a specific historical phase. The pre-Christian era was divided into the age of the Father, who for Joachim represented the Old Testament, and the Son, who represented the New Testament. And the third apocalyptic age, of which Joachim was the self-proclaimed prophet, of course, was the age of the Holy Spirit. And during this age, sacred scripture, the church, and the state would give way to a free communist world. And echoing the ancient Gnostics, docetistic attitude toward physical embodiment, Joachim claimed that man would divest himself of flesh and enter into this state of disembodied bliss. But after Joachim came the 17th century German cobbler, Jacob Boehm, who inspired mystical English communist Gerard Winstanley. And like a heresiarch Marcion, Boehm advanced a bifurcated conception of God to reflect what was perceived as two contrary natures. In Boehm's view, the God of the Old Testament embodied wrath, while the God of the New Testament embodied love. So you see where that's derivative of Marcion's
Yes, that's
particular.
exactly what I was going to say. And this is also why so many modern Gnostics like Jung love Jakob Boehm.
Yeah,
Henri Corbin sees him as a linkage point between Eastern Orthodoxy and the Protestant world, and then also over into Islam that has similar ideas and some of the Manichaean roots there to bring these
right.
things all together. And it also has to do with this idea of man having to save the world for a new dispensation. So now you're fixing the religion and fixing world,
Exactly.
reducing it to sociological reduction.
Exactly. Well, because in that scheme, the two contrary natures of God, these two contrary natures of God,
One thing I'd
were
like
but
to point out here too, right before we move on, just so we don't lose the thought later when we come to it again, is that Joachim of Fiore is very beloved too by people right now who are trying to push Christian transhumanism. David Patrick Harry, I sponsored a stream that he did where he got into their presuppositions. They all bring in Joachim of Fiore for this dispensationalism and to
yeah,
move
isn't
into
that?
age of the seals.
I think that even Jordan Peterson has an affinity for him.
He
The
made a
problem that
website.
I
He made a website for a Joachim of Fiore church because then he could have his Catholic traditionalism, but not
yeah,
have to deal with this WEF Pope. But this is
right.
this is a transhumanist
Right. Yeah, the problem
heretic.
that the problem, as far as I can see it, is that the cultural Christianity that characterizes the American landscape is really a lot different than what existed back on the continent, and certainly different from what existed in what we would characterize as the Holy Land. You know, with the formation of the ancient church, it these different disparate sects, whether you're dealing with the Pilgrims, whether you're dealing with the Quakers, whether you're dealing with the Mennonites, there was all a degree to which they separated themselves from what was apostolic. They pulled away from apostolic communions. They pulled away from Anglicanism. They pulled away from Orthodoxy. They pulled away from the Catholic Church. So any kind of grounding in those
Right.
more apostolic minded communions got more and more remote to the point where these heresies could thus creep in. And you can see where a certain cross section of America's oligarchy, namely those within the Southern Rim and the neoconservatives, have exploited that to their advantage. You know,
Right.
well, especially with groups that derive a large amount of inspiration from the Schofield Bible,
Yes.
you know, which had ideas that were completely alien to eschatology as it was understood by the church fathers, by you know the apostles and all. It was completely alien. I mean, if you were to present, for instance, if you were to present any of the ideas of Hal Lindsey or Tim LaHaye to a Christian in the ancient church,
Yeah,
they would not recognize any
Yeah.
of that. It would be completely bizarre and
Right.
completely novel ideas to them.
Right, exactly. And also you see kind of in particular at places like Yale, the flourishing of these Western Christian systems such as Calvinism, which really amounts to Gnosticism. You have a Manichaean partitioning off of humanity into these soteriological categories of the elect and the damned, and their soteriological statuses are rendered immutable. So whether one is damned or whether one is among the elect, that is fixed, that is immutable, it cannot be changed. Much the same way that the Gnostics viewed humanity as being the pneumatikoi, the spiritual man, and the psychikoi, the natural man, which is a distortion of the binary posited by St. Paul in his epistles. St. Paul understood, and the early church fathers understood, that these were two orientations that existed in all men. Instead, the Manichaeans and you know, Gnostic systems in general depicted this binary as
an immutable ontological status and that humanity occupied. You either occupied the category of pneumatikoi or sukeikoi, and it's the same with the Calvinist. And Calvinism, of course, flourished at Yale. And what came out of Yale? Well, Skull and Bones. And you see a lot of Skull and Bones, this secret society's theology, its belief system is derivative of Gnosticism.
Yeah, it's a kind of fusion.
Yeah,
it's a fusion of Calvinism with different varieties of esotericism.
Yeah,
going back.
And you have out of Skull and Bones, you have George W. emerging from the halls thereof.
Yeah.
And of course, George W.'s administration, as we will see, will come to be heavily populated by these neoconservatives. But I'm sorry, were you
quick too here is that
Sure.
this determinism also fits very well in with the scientific determinism when it gets
It
extracted
absolutely
out
does.
of it, and evolutionary determinism, and then you're back at this view on history. You see it
Absolutely.
all coming together, and the only way to overcome this determinism is to actually affect history by affecting
That's
man
right.
himself, by manipulating the sociological, structures. Especially as we get
Exactly.
into this. So you have a great section in here too. We'll probably be coming up on soon on
Sure.
sociology. Could you explain how the sociology starts to dictate everything?
Sure. Okay. Well, with sociology, the most the sociology, the school of sociology, we can trace it back to Sir Francis Bacon. With on the Baconian outlook, Sir Francis Bacon's outlook, history was defined by stages of growth and development. And the growth and lo and behold, not unlike Joachim of Fior, this Trinitarian eschatology, this three-phase eschatology, with the metaphysical being the lowest thereof, and the highest being the scientific phase, when man enters this phase of gnosis, because Bacon esteemed science not simply as a method, but as a veritable gnosis, as a veritable saving knowledge. But on the Baconian view, history was defined by the growth and development of science and technology, and Bacon supplanted Plato's philosopher kings, those who could discern the forms of social justice, with a technical elite who governed according to the principles of technical order and efficiency. And Bacon advanced such a societal arrangement in the New Atlantis, a subtly prescriptive piece of literature that basically presented readers with a purely technocratic society. One of the core assumptions upon which the Baconian societal model was premised was that the cosmos was bereft of a telos, an end goal. So telos is the etymological root of the philosophical term teleology, which is the study of purposiveness in the universe. Teleology concerns itself with the purposes and ultimate ends of natural things. And Bacon was among one of the first theoreticians who would expunge purposiveness and meaning from scientific studies. Though he certainly was not a scientist of great consequence, Bacon distinguished himself as the first great promoter, organizer, and propagandist for science, capital S, as a perpetual institution. And before science was subjected to teleological revisions, it was a quasi-spiritual contemplation of the intrinsic purposes of things' essences. So science used to esteem a telos. It used to be
Yes.
A teleological enterprise, but he divested the universe of a telos and in so doing, divested scientific studies of telos. The discipline of science initially presupposed the intelligibility of the cosmos, and such a presupposition was well founded. If the cosmos was not intelligible, then a scientist's efforts to understand the natural order would be futile. After all, the unintelligible remains immune to meaningful study and apprehension. If intelligibility were a ubiquitous feature of the universe, then the interpretive instruments if unintelligibility were a ubiquitous
feature of the universe. If the universe were meaningless, then the interpretive instruments of science would be rendered useless. A disteleological cosmos would possess no meaning. Instead, a disteleological cosmos would be, by definition, meaningless, purposeless, and it would not be susceptible to any sort of instruments of understanding. It couldn't be interpreted. There could be no hermeneutic according to which it could be grasped. And ironically, the discernment of the meaning of the natural order's various mechanisms is a chief vocation of science. But nevertheless, Bacon believed that the nature could be forced to reveal her secrets through systematic experimentation once teleology was rejected. And this rejection would significantly alter the ends towards which many scientific enterprises were directed. To understand the ramification of teleology's exile from science, you have to first understand the relationship between science and metaphysics. Metaphysics is prior to science. Errant metaphysical propositions typically presage science going awry. With raw scientific data is decoupled from a legitimate metaphysical framework, ideological biases are given carte blanche. In Bacon's rejection of teleology in favor of a mechanical interpretation of nature was the metaphysical error that gave rise to much of the misguided science witnessed by the 20th and 21st centuries. And you mentioned earlier evolutionary theory, Darwinism, that would come into being in large measure because of this mechanistic understanding of the universe.
And it's preceded too in Descartes, who actually had visions of the world as a machine from what he thought were angels.
Right, exactly. Same with Newton and Newton,
yes. And he was an alchemist.
Right. Yes, absolutely right. But this view of things, this mechanistic view of nature, probably stemmed from certain ideological biases that Bacon had imbibed within more esoteric quarters. Bacon was a member of a secret society called the Order of the Helmet, and that organization, its name was inspired by Pallas Athene, the Greek goddess of wisdom, who was portrayed wearing a helmet. And the order's rather fetishized view of wisdom echoed the Gnostic conception of Sophia, who represented an agency of gnosis, the one who delivers secret knowledge. And appropriately enough, it was a student of neo-philosophy, Hermeticism, and Gnosticism. He also studied Kabbalah, but all of these proffered their own iterations of gnosis. But Bacon was also a Grand Master of the secret Rosicrucian order, and which was closely associated with Freemasonry. And when Bacon published The New Atlantis, the book was adorned with Masonic symbols like the square, the compass, the two pillars of Solomon's temple, and the blazing triangle, the eye of God, which suggests his association with secret societies that subscribe to these sort of utopian concepts. But Bacon insisted
that they want this Gnostic impulse always seems to seek. And Father Hears and David Patrick Harry have also gotten into this, and I think James Lindsay was sort of influenced by Dyer when he kind of pinned this down a little bit. The Gnostic impulse seems to seek these hermetic structures to have something it can actually act upon, but then it still has to infiltrate the actual systems and religions. But this technical idea, it needs to enforce its will on something to actually make something happen. Otherwise, you're just in your fantasy land.
It's funny that you bring that up, because one of the things that this immersion in esotericism and Gnostic thinking and in Neoplatonist philosophy led to was Francis Bacon basically penning in 1605 like the skeletal outlines of what we would call the deep state today, because he wrote back then, he said, we see the government of God over the world is hidden. And he believed that an obscuritist form of government, something that's obscure and invisible, was the best form of government. It was the government that governed best. Right. And this kind of secretive government is also very
it's very coercive, and it likes to it imposes its will by force if have to.
Yeah.
So much of this is emanating from the thought from Baconian thought.
Right.
And you said
Also,
it supplanted Platonic thought for a technical rulership instead of a philosophical rulership. But
right.
Plato still had similar ideas when he got into his Council of Night.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the with you mentioned also like how Hermeticism is kind of preoccupied with the imposition of will, uh, with the divesting of a telos. You have this portrayal of the universe as being something entirely malleable, right? There's no ontological fixity to it. Um, this makes it possible for the imposition of will upon the physical universe, and hence you have this Baconian notion of the empire of the human mind over matter, and basically what with Sir Francis Bacon's dysteleology, you have really the uh, a tacit promotion of libido dominandi, because that's all that nature responds to. Nature responds to the will. That nature is forced into the rack by the human mind, which is guided by the will and by which, as the church fathers understood, the will is disordered, and that's why it results in the disfiguration of this. It results the imposition of will results in the disfiguration of the world. But Bacon's scientific humanitarianism was eventually consecrated by the academics and adopted by oligarchic forces as the hermeneutical key for unlocking nature's secrets. Chief among these forces were the Defense Department technocrats, whose militaristic prerogatives have been and continue to be formed by Bacon's scientific pragmatism. When one sees things such as the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, which many of the early neocons actually promoted, or the High Frequency Oral Research Program, or HARP, one has seen a Baconian quest on the part of the military establishment. The pretext for that quest, of course, is always securing democracy.
And
But
this also has a big effect on psychology at this time because
right,
everything becomes about measure and grit and quantification, and for the war effort as well during the world wars. We
right.
started.
Well, and
Go
yeah, you're
ahead.
right, because psychology was originally a philosophical discipline, and then all of a
Yes.
sudden it becomes under Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt. It becomes it becomes a subsidiary of the physical sciences, and so all is reducible to the physiological, to the anatomical, to the glandular. So the human being, there is no soul. He basically rejected the soul. The human being is nothing more than a reactive animal, and of course, his psychology came to define Prussian militarism,
Yep.
and yep, the Prussian militarist schema.
Well, while we're still kind of back here in the early part of the century, too, it'd be good to touch very quickly because we already kind of talked about the French Revolution, how that Prussian system came into America too, and got us back into expansionism, kind of off the manifest destiny too. Right when all this is happening, we get more scientific.
Right, right. Prussianism actually goes back in history, in American history, to the Revolution, to the
Yes.
American Revolution. Both sides had Prussian advisors. Both sides had Prussian generals that called upon Prussianism as kind of a as a source of inspiration. But
And there's elements of this too in George Washington, and he has the masonry too, but he was a little more honest, and he rejected the expansionism and the military state, and he rejected being a king for life or a president for life also. But the
right, right.
Federalists that were dominant at the time wanted a president for life, and they wanted to continue the British
Yeah,
expansionism.
and when he rejected a royal title, he
essentially set us off on an anti-militarist and anti-authoritarian trajectory, and all, that kind of broke with that Prussianism. But Prussianism was rife, especially when it came to warfare. Here in the, during the revolution, again, like they both the Americans and the British were turning to the Prussians. And I think that that one of the reasons that was because, it, when Prussianism really took off, and it was warfare that acted as the catalyst, because they had lost. The Prussians had lost this, they had this crushing defeat at the hands of Napoleon at the Battle of Vienna. And they said, well, the problem is that we have soldiers that are hesitant. They think for themselves. They hesitate to act, and all. There's too much contemplation and not enough action. They try to impose critical thinking upon all the decisions, and all. So we need to basically expunge that from their way of thinking. And so they came up with, I believe it was a three-tiered society, and all, where you had people down at the bottom that were just taught the base rudimentary skill sets. Then you had
to operate as a machine, if we want to get into the mechanistic element here. I mean, you see that Goya's painting of the what is it, the 5th of May? The soldiers are like a machine, and man's completely trapped from the divine.
Yeah, and the important thing to see there is that there's no critical thinking. That's completely expunged from the rearing and the upbringing with that first tier. The second tier, they're more of an administrative class, more of a bureaucracy, so they know a little bit more. But again, the critical thinking is not there. With that third tier, that you basically you have the critical thinking, and you have the ability to apply a more critical mind to decisions that have to be made.
It should also be noted here with this tiered system, because they were the superior military, but when they lose to Napoleon too, they sort of adopt some of the system that was going on there, but they upgrade it. It's almost like there's an arms race going on there. And they had similar systems. They invoked the Greeks, like this humanism, to kind of replace Christianity a lot. And they instituted a sort of Spartan system, which was very early social engineering.
Right, absolutely. Well, we also know that that even with Marx, while he would reject a lot of the aspects of Prussianism, his own ideas, ended up having aspects of Prussian thought in them, and all. He was born in Prussia. In 1888, he was actually born in Prussia, and so you would naturally expect him to have imbibed some of that thinking
within a formative ethos such as that.
But I mean, like, he found a way to take Prussianism and mix it with his idea of a proletariatocracy of sorts, and it would be a Prussian state that was formed by proletariat bred people, and governed by those same people, and all, and so it would still have that Prussian ruthless edge to it, but would have that kind of egalitarian quality to it that one would expect from a Marxist state.
Right. But at any rate, returning to the development of and history of sociology, moving from Bacon, you had André de Saint-Simon, who was his work was interpreted as a prescription for Bacon's prophecy in the New Atlantis. And this 18th century French utopian socialist advanced what he called a new Christianity, which offered morality without metaphysics and technology without theology. As is made painfully obvious by his rejection of metaphysics, Saint Simone's Christianity did not acknowledge any transcendent order. In the absence of that reality, in the absence of that transcendent order, the new Christianity expressed no other soteriological concern apart from the collective good. So social ills, not the disordered human will, became the source of all evil. Essentially, Saint Simone projected evil outside of the intangible will and superimposed it upon the tangible world, just as the ancient Gnostics did. And this concretization of evil, which smacks of Gnosticism, leads to his social theories. Because the external world is the source of all evil. It is the external world which must be reconfigured, and the philosophical and conceptual groundwork for rendering tenable that reconfiguration of reality was already set into motion by Bacon's dysteleology, Bacon's divesting the cosmos of a telos, thereby rendering the cosmos, rendering the material world as completely malleable. Not surprisingly, Saint Simone suggested that the new Christianity would resemble heretical Christian sects of the past. So this new Christianity, which was the derivative of the very heresies that challenged Orthodox Christianity, would supposedly reorganize society to help the poor. But to understand the reorganized society envisaged by this new Christianity, one must first understand Saint Simone's surrogate for a supramundane God. By substituting technology for theology, Saint Simone imbued automation with salvific qualities. According to this new faith, the existing ideological disparities would be banished by science. The divine would no longer be rendered intelligible by priest, but by scientist. Since materiality had been enshrined as the sole reality, it stood to reason that only scientists possessed the requisite gnosis to understand the intramundane divinity from whence materiality arose. Meanwhile, the processes of governance would no longer be administered by administrated by politicians, but by technicians. And since the mechanistic view of the cosmos held sway, it stood to reason that society was nothing more than a machine, and as such would be operated by those who possessed gnosis concerning such operating systems. And by the way, this view of a machine state, of a machine invention, the machine man, obviously that was promoted, of course, by Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt and Wundtian psychology. But one of Wundt's family members, I forget which one, I think Casimir Wundt, I can't recall what his name was, but one of Wundt's family members was actually a member of the Bavarian Illuminati, the 18th century Enlightenment secret society devoted to revolution, the overthrow of all legitimate governments, and was founded by Adam Weishaupt. But
and all of that,
he also had a machine view.
Yes, exactly.
All of that,
exactly.
And all of that also brings you back to the Prussian milieu, because Wundt's whole approach to psychology was kind of formulated in that kind of Prussian milieu. And Nesta Webster, in her works over the Bavarian Illuminati, one of the things she noted about the Illuminists was that they had this on and off kind of love affair with the Prussians, and that they would simultaneously compete while drawing inspiration from Prussianism, and also. Right.
Well, I think you see that in a sort of mimetic exchange throughout all this between the French revolutionaries and these Illuminists and the Prussians, and now with the liberals and with the neocons.
Yeah. This kind of like, I hate you, but I love you. Please don't leave me.
This recurring.
And you need their tools, right? You got to have what they have to beat them.
Right. Yeah, it's this recurring. Well, it's funny that you said that because one of the things they were fighting against was Prussianism in World War One, but was Sir Ralph Norman Engel, who was a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which puts him right in the orbit of that Anglophile network. He was even warning in his book America in the New World State, a plea for American leadership in international organization. He was warning against what he called, quote unquote, Anglo-Saxon Prussianism. And he said, look, basically it was the same idea that you found that Friedrich Nietzsche embodied in his one statement: in fighting monsters, do not become a monster yourself. He said, look, we're fighting these Central Powers, and we're fighting the Germans, and the what really the driving force behind the Germans and their expansionism is this Prussianism, but we ourselves are beginning to imbibe that very Prussianism in order to counter them. And if I recall correctly, in that book, and all in the book that Engel wrote, he actually said that he pointed to the consummate Anglo-Saxon Prussian being none other than Ruskin,
John Ruskin.
yeah, John Ruskin, the mentor to Cecil Rhodes, who would found basically him and he and Alfred Milner, Lord Alfred Milner, would go on to basically start the constellation, of groups that would lead to to a large portion of our stateside oligarchy. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. It found its way into their thinking. So there was even as they were competing with the Prussians within the Central Powers. So there was kind of almost a strange kind of weird symbiosis there.
Yeah, dialectical commonality shared by the two. But
you see Nietzsche too talked about the
returning
state.
to Saint Simone's mission. It was basically a religious one. He experienced the tumult of the French Revolution, so he was painfully acquainted with the chaos stemming from institutional religion's complete ouster. He saw what the destruction of institutional religion resulted in. Okay, even though he was, opposed to, certainly to most traditional religions. But he realized that the amputation of the church from the state was analogous to the removal of the soul from the body. So the soulless state was an indiscriminate murderer, as is evidenced by the government of revolutionary France. The irony is that, in hopes of subduing the fires of revolution, Saint Simon actually provided the theoretical basis for the most destructive revolution of them all.
And this is what Father Seraphim Rose says, is that the purpose of this, if we look at it, the large scale of this as being like the devil's dialectic and not just man's philosophical dialectic, is to start divorcing us from the truth to the point we have to start incorporating errors to make things work. And then we come up with false religion. And you see on these people like Saint Simon, who, I mean, you had to, if you're going to be a useful idiot in that dialectic, you have to be somewhat genius compared to other humans. So you have these thinkers who are kind of looking into this, and they're way ahead of their time, seeing how religion will have to be incorporated, but they incorporate it into the revolution. Then on the other, more conservative side of this, with like the old Hegelians, and you start to see the religious positivism, and they don't have anything to justify the religion, and all they can do is, say, oh, well, things worked better. There's a lot of systemic knowledge in here, so we just have to use this like a social club to keep order, pretty much. And you see this in classic liberals like Hippolyte Taine, who wrote volumes that are great on the French Revolution.
And, exactly.
And it's like you're coming back to that again with like Jordan Peterson trying to do that. But then he's incorporating the errors and rebuilding Christianity on like Gnosticism.
You even see it. You even see it with the counterparts to the collective West oligarchs their Eastern counterparts in the Islamic world, Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who basically started the Pan-Arab movement, which out of which would, through a long process, out of which would grow the Muslim Brotherhood, which has had a long symbiotic relationship
Yes.
with our deep state, with the British deep state. But you see, with him, he would play at being the pious Muslim and all, but then behind the scenes, he was actually a Freemason and spoke of the quote unquote social utility of religion.
Exactly. This pragmatic view of religion.
And,
Right?
and they love Islam for this too, because it's very reducible to a sociological structure, and it
Right.
and I think also they're missing something with the apostasy rates and the spread of modernity, which will affect them the same way it is, well, us, but right now they have high breeding rates and fertility rates, so they purport it to be this thing that will solve modern problems.
Right.
They want to
Right.
incorporate this, and then people will actually turn to it to restore some kind of order because we don't have anything to stop what's going on here, or
Yeah,
real
absolutely.
Christianity.
Right.
I mean, some of the Christian civilization in Africa might offset them because I mean, the last time that I
Yeah.
checked, um, places like Burundi, places like Ethiopia, they're just beating us all to hell when it comes to pronatal policy. They have 5 and 7 children, even if it causes financial difficulties.
Yeah.
Whereas here you're lucky if you're fortunate if you find a household with 2 children.
Right. I'm not an avid viewer of Fox News for obvious reasons. I mean, we're discussing neoconservatism, and you couldn't have a bigger bastion of neoconservatism than Fox News. But I did see on Fox News where it was reported that, in particular, the enlightened liberals, the left in the West, are having fewer and fewer children, and so you see where if demography is destiny, they are already through this the system of infertility that is part and parcel of their worldview. They're already headed towards extinction, whereas the pro fertility beliefs of Christianity in particular, but traditional religions in general, that ensures the continuity of their traditions into the future. Um, but clearly, the 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 left, and not just the left, but just the overall Gnostic project that has been Western civilization does not countenance the propositional content of any religion, but especially Christianity. They, like Saint Simon, they want to adopt those aspects of these religions that will guarantee their survival, will allow for the maintenance of order, while at the same time rejecting all of the metaphysical certainties thereof, such as a god, a
Yeah.
transcendent order, or what have you. You find that with Saint Simon. He hoped to bring an end to revolution by promoting a science of human relations, and he drew upon the radical empiricism of Destutt de Tracy and extended that rigid epistemology into the new field of social relations. And in so doing, he enshrined a strictly quantitative approach to governance. And arguably, this epistemology of governance would constitute a new gnosis for the aspiring
Yes.
elite of the
And
subsequent centuries.
and there's something about that too, because without philosophy just becomes psychology. And then it's
Right.
about what you can do with it. But here's the thing: if all that matters is measure, it doesn't tell you what to measure, and you can't measure everything, and you can't measure all metaphysical or even just human concepts within psychology. As soon as you get into a study that has to do something more, the more it becomes social and
Uh-huh.
large
Right.
scale, you can't actually replicate that. You have this big replication crisis in psychology. So I could get a good replication of my study if I can get 1,000 people and strap them down into a CAT scan machine or a skin conductivity. But like me sitting in this chair here staring at something while you measure my skin, isn't real life. You have to have
No.
these metaphysical categories of good and truth, and historical categories and moral categories to understand human beings.
You kind of seem to be touching on what the French metaphysician Ray Guénon was talking about when he coined the term the reign of quantity. You know, they
Yes.
wanted to quantify things, but there was no qualitative analysis there. And I know that as it relates to the topic here, this fixation with quantification would actually go on to hurt the oligarchs here in the United States and lead to kind of a splintering between that Southern Rim and that Eastern liberal establishment. It would lead to the schism between those two around 1967 and 1968 when the Military Assistance Command Vietnam began to disagree with the CIA regarding their intelligence estimates regarding the order of battle, the Vietnamese order of battle. If you look at what Westmoreland, the general that was the head of the Military Assistant Commands Vietnam, what he was asserting, for instance, he believed in what he called a quote unquote crossover point. And this crossover point would be where the kill ratio would actually exceed the number of recruits being brought in on the enemy side. So
Yes.
their replacement levels would be outstripped by the American kill ratio. So
Yeah,
it was
that
all
even trumped, taking land or any kind of a
yeah,
strategic.
yeah. It was all this quantitative BS, this quantitative BS. There was nothing qualitative about it, like considering, like, where's the consideration of the indigenous populations resolved to win no
Right.
matter what,
Yes.
Right.
and all.
Or just if you're all you're doing, all you are is fixated on kill rates. Have you taken into account the resentment that would engender among the indigenous population if you
Yes.
killed somebody's brother or somebody's sister, that one of your children was lost as
Uh,
collateral
I,
damage? That would only strengthen the resolve to resist.
and I know that. So
Yes.
somebody that in my background, I had a teacher that was he was a judge back in Ohio, and while he was during the Vietnam War, he had been recruited by the CIA, and one of the things that he did was in intelligence work, and in analyzing that intelligence work, and one something that he and some of his associates were saying to their superiors, because they were talking to these people. They were actually talking to these Vietnamese people and getting into their heads, finding out something about their mindset. They said, look, if this is all about a battle of attrition, we can't win because these people have the absolute resolve.
Right.
They losing is not an option for them, and all
Yeah.
but their their leaders took none of this the leaders here took none of that qualitative assessment into account until around 68 with the Tet Offensive, and we just saw whole units over there decimated,
Right.
and that's when the Eastern liberal establishment pulls away from the Southern Rim. The Southern Rim says, stay the course. Yes, Eastern liberal establishment says, we've gotten all that we can get. It's time to get out of Southeast Asia. We've everything that we could possibly exploit there. We've gotten, but we're not going to.
Right.
We have to get out while the getting is good.
All because of this obsession with metrics.
And
But
Yeah.
and
And it
and
seems
and
too that they did a lot of metrics on our own people over there rather than even being
yes.
concerned about winning. And some of the experiments in the Phoenix program that led to so many serial killers,
Oh,
displacing
absolutely.
entire populations and putting them somewhere else in Vietnam,
Yeah.
taking one group of Vietnamese and putting them into a foreign
Oh,
camp
oh,
to see
oh,
what they would do.
absolutely. I'm glad you bring that up because I know that Dave McGowan has basically had soundly made an argument that basically what we saw with the serial killer phenomenon here at home was basically um, Phoenix program coming home to roost, being
Yeah,
brought back,
I absolutely think so, and I don't think I'm just
and
to
the funny
make a caveat here. I'm not making the claim all serial killers were just made
no,
by Vietnam or by the war or
no,
by our
no,
government. I
no,
think
but
the ideas and the demonic are breaking out, and the ideas we have
oh,
and our culture is
absolutely,
so meaningless. But like the vast number that were involved in the Phoenix program
yeah.
and came home and started doing serial killings is it's unquestionable.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, like, and again, like, you have quantification playing into that because, one of those serial killers who clearly had a deep state connection, Henry Lee Lucas,
Yeah,
he was so um, fixated on his kill ratio that he actually inflated his number. I mean, like there were people that he didn't kill that he said that he had killed. I mean, like he kept on, just embellishing upon. I mean, like they. I forget what the number was that he said, but reality was that it fell far below the ratio that he was claiming, but there was that quantification fixation there,
Right.
well,
that
this
that
quantification too removes you from real like reality in a general and global sense. If you're talking about the
Right.
whole, it gets you caught up into the parts, so you end up in a false
Right.
reality. And I think that breeds narcissism. It's
Yes.
autistic, and that
Yes.
I'm not promoting his spirituality, but I think you can see a lot from Dr. Ian McGilchrist, his work on this with the left and the right hemispheres, and he talks about how we murder to dissect to break things down, and whenever it's the left hemisphere that needs to get things, but it doesn't have any reason or telos, it
No.
divorces any emotion, but it makes everything about quantity. But when, in extreme cases, it becomes pathological, like the serial killer or like a sociopath. And he's
Right.
saying as we get more mechanistic, we're using that type of our thinking, and it's like our society becomes like more autistic in its thinking and more sociopathological.
absolutely,
Yeah, I would
absolutely.
agree. I would agree.
But it's also funny how that abandonment of telos leads to a kind of an unconscious seeking of telos. Like, I mean,
Yes.
for if you look at like on a grand scale, the CIA, the Cold War ends, their telos is lost, so they start looking around for a new telos. Well, they find it to an extent in the GWAT, the Global War on Terror, but they also find it to a great extent in bringing the war home and actually waging war on the American people and all that, which is, what kind of we see with these remnants of what appear to be remnants of MH chaos here
Yeah,
in the United States.
and it's the same tactics we've allowed to go on in the world. I'm not an America hater or anything like this. I'm not
No,
saying this
no,
for the purpose of wanting to fix the problem, but we have, and we could, like, you could be sympathetic because with the boomer generation, there was a normalcy to the propaganda and there was a unity to the
Yeah.
society, and things were working. We had like some of the greatest prosperity ever. So
Sure.
why would you question it?
Right.
right,
Right.
So, but
right.
we have allowed our government to work with these companies and go wage color revolutions, banana republics all over the world, and using this war psychology down to some of these people. I think you can blame some things on America not knowing what it was doing or getting too big or having a one-sided goal of just American support, but there are nefarious actors here, and the ideas themselves do tie into some of these occult and esoteric ideas even when they're extracted into empiricism. And there's people
Right.
that have this down to a science that have been doing it for a very long time, and we've allowed them to engage in psychological warfare and massive manipulation and brutality all over the world in these other countries, and now they're doing it here. It's,
Right.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Well, and you see that. Okay, so I was touching on Saint Simone and everything, who is it was the next installment in this continuity after Bacon. This installment in the continuity underpinning the development and history of sociology. Well, the his quest for this civil religion and a science of human relations continued with his disciple, who was none other than Auguste Comte.
yep,
And Auguste Comte built on the ideas of Saint Simon,
with
and
a
he
hardcore
advanced.
logical positivism that
Right,
would
yeah,
enslave everything. It's like determinism on steroids with the
Oh God,
scientific
yes.
state.
Oh, good grief, yes. I mean, absolute mechanization of humanity in it with Auguste Comte's sociology. He advanced the development of a surrogate religion, which was, of course, an idea that Saint Simon had also contemplated, where Saint Simon proposed a new Christianity. Comte promoted the concept of a sociocracy, which could be described as a new religion of humanity. And with a sociocracy, you see the enshrinement through what Comte its enshrinement came through what Comte dubbed sociology. Sociology, as defined by Comte, involved a system of secularized sacraments and festivals, all of which he believed that through this system of devotional rites, participants would consecrate themselves to humanity with a capital H, venerated as the great being, divinized humanity incarnated itself as great historical figures. In fact, adherents of Comte's religion believed that all humans, dead and alive, comprised the grand being. So you kind of see there a tacit autotheism, this belief in humanity as God. And of course, the worship of humanity, whether under the appellation of the grand being or some other designation, it qualifies as a form of autotheism. With Comte's grand being, one discerns intimations also of the Gnostic pleroma, albeit in an immanentized form. Like his Gnostic antecedents, Comte believed that the human essence once commingled with divine essence inside a singular deific power. In fact, Comte's grand being represented a far more radical formulation of autotheism because it was exclusively composed of the entire human race. Humanity and Tato represented God. Man did not simply exist in ontological union with the divine, but collectively constituted it as an apotheosized species. Within the framework of Comte's theocracy, the governing priesthood of this intramundane divinity would be social scientists. And you had Comtean churches being founded in London and other major cities, a fact that further underscores the impressive sphere of influence exerted by the scientific religion.
And this needs replacement saints, right? And when you start,
right, yes,
because this cannot actually encapsulate a whole theological and philosophical frame. Wherever it starts lacking, they need another philosopher, and they start to use them dialectically, and they kind of can be categorized under Aristotelian, Platonic, and then either some kind of technical inaction or some kind of a Stoic or Neo-Stoic inaction to fuse these together. So you get like an immanentized trinity, and you start to see that Father Rose saw that with Erasmus saying, "I could almost say Saint Socrates." And now you got like with after Socrates.
And I'm glad you bring that up. I'm glad you bring that up because we actually see the rise. We actually saw the rise of an American sociocracy here during the so-called pandemic. Because you look at, for instance, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci. He was. There were actually icons made of that man.
Was there really?
Yes, there were icons made of him. Icons, pictures, actual pictures of him that were hideous, hideous parodies of Orthodox icons. And he became one more. He became one more saint, one more divinized theoretician in this emergent sociocracy here in the United States. It was quite literally a Comtean sociocracy formed around this man, Anthony Fauci. And
I am the science. And
I am the science.
If you can't have a coherent epistemology, and you're shooting in the blind for some kind of something above that for your metaphysics, anything that's deemed Gnostic, like the scientific expert that's going to bring us into a utopia, trumps the epistemology.
That's right, exactly. But it was really funny because I remember. So there was an article by Hyperallergic that was out back in 2020, April 13th, which talked about how all these artists had taken to the internet and they were making tributes to Anthony Fauci. And if you look at those tributes,
and all. They take like for instance, Saint Pantaleon, the healer. They took a picture of Anthony Fauci and basically turned him into Saint Pantaleon.
Yeah, simply posted onto that icon.
The healer, and I mean, like, he was a kind of a late medieval saint and all, and then I mean, like, uh, there was all these other different saints that they were drawing inspiration from, and in drawing up the iconography of him. It
Right.
was
And with Fauci, you even have Fauci said at one point that I think it was in one of his private emails, I genuflect to no other than science, and I think so. You have this scientism, this fetishization of science as being a gnosis, and Fauci being a possessor of the gnosis.
This is a good place too
am
to get
science.
into the neoconservative side of this, and we could probably do another conversation where this gets further into the left and these transhumanists, because even if you go back to Comte, you start to see a kind of almost incorporation of some of this, because you have to, based on your presuppositions and the way we start getting this Prussianization and everything. But there's a sort of vitalist revolt to that becomes a little more like right wing a lot of the time. You
Right.
see that in thinkers like Gustave Le Bon, who saw the mass psychology problems in the French Revolution, and they try to offer something, but they don't have a religion. So you start moving in this hard right wing response. You're seeing that now with the advocacy for Islam right now. That's kind of being integrated into the right and synthesizing communism with like Kerry Bolton and Jackson Hinkle and whatnot, or Stalinism because he was ethno-nationalist and anti-Zionist. So if we get into
Right.
this science becoming the thing in this military-industrial complex, this is really, in my opinion, where these neocons really take over and kick out the old right.
Right,
Is based
exactly.
off these suppositions.
Right. Well,
And that desire, you, if you want to talk about vitalism, that desire for a new enemy too, with the Cold
right.
War. And the Cold War was a giant spell on everybody.
I think that what we're seeing right now is that, okay, so um, one thing that characterizes the oligarchs, and this is missed by a lot of people. A lot of people think that they're unerring, that that their plans are airtight, that their
Yeah.
plans take into consideration every single contingency.
Right.
Well, that just ain't so. And see, they've really overplayed their hands by radicalizing this new crop of people, and trying to manage and direct the rage of these new radicals that we would call woke. The
Yes.
problem with now, what they're finding is that the problem with woke radicals, as opposed to radicals going back into the 60s and prior, is that woke radicals aren't they're not just seeking reform, they are waging epistemological warfare on reality itself.
Yes, exactly.
Now, if you deconstruct all of reality, then then that consumes the oligarchs as well as the rest of us. They can't have that. So what they have to do now is they have to encourage a counter revolution, but they have to be able to control that counter revolution. So they have people like the neoconservatives that have a kind of conservative garb to them,
Right.
but also have all the hallmarks of elitism still there intact. Just
Right. Well, as
Yeah.
Frank Fisher,
Yeah.
yeah,
You talk about they have experts in your book, that their experts
Yes.
are more entrepreneurial. So
yeah,
you're
it's
putting on a new.
exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. The Frank
The
Fisher,
Koch brothers too have these Gnostic suppositions, right? They wrote about how we would have to have super pollution and
Right.
and evolve beyond that, and something like a new form of Protestant elect would evolve above that.
That's
So just
absolutely
more
right.
and more capitalism, no matter what, and destroy everything else. Be damned, just make more money. A lot of people
Right.
don't know that about them because they just present themselves as free market. They don't understand that this is like they're using the markets almost like in a Christianized Protestant type, as a type of alchemical process almost, even if they don't know the source of that.
Right, absolutely. Well, as Frank Fisher points out in his book, The Politics of Expertise, it, there's this consensus among neoconservative policy professionals. You know, they regard policy professionals as a mockery. They never present as an alternative to policy professionals their own coterie of policy professionals.
Yes.
So it's really just a dialectic. It's really just a tactic. They skeptical quality very with the very left leaning policy professionals they ostensibly oppose, and that's why you hear recent years a Hegelian synthesis under between the neocons and liberals. You for instance, Mitt Romney, who is more so of a neocon orientation, um, Mitt Romney has said he's more inclined to vote for a Democrat now.
Yeah.
You have you have uh, uh, you have Adam Kissinger and Liz Cheney sitting on largely neoliberal committees like the J6, show trial committees. But at any rate,
And you got
neoconservatism.
Nikki
Oh,
Haley
go ahead.
telling us to take a
Oh,
million
Nikki,
Palestinian refugees.
absolutely, Nikki Hale. Yeah, but see, and this is because they essentially represent just another outgrowth of the same intellectual and philosophical heritage. So as I was touching on before, I was touching on these new Gnostic systems. With first with Joachim of Fior, then with Jakob Boehm. But Jakob Boehm eventually his new system of Gnosticism resulted in the crescendo of Immanentist eschatologies with the advent of the Hegelian dialectic, uh, which of course was a product of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. According to George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, one state of affairs, that is to say, the thesis, births its antithesis. And as a product of the thesis, the antithesis retains certain commonalities with its progenitor, because the thesis and the antithesis are not actually dichotomously related. The resultant binary opposition will invariably draw the two towards a synthesis. And the ostensible struggle between various dialectical extremes facilitates an Aufbung, or which is German for a lifting up. So Aufbung after Aufbung guides history along an upward trajectory, and the eschaton arrives with the ecstasy of union between God and man. And the union experienced by man and God in this process is marked by fusion, the assumption of ontological parity with God. Um, and so, of course, with Hegel, Hegel's dialectic was revised by Karl Marx, who was seeking the rational kernel within the mystical shell, as he put it. And he
Yes.
applied the Hegelian dialectic exclusively to the material world. And the
Exactly.
reason, yep,
Exactly. And here's a point Nietzsche made, and I'm not promoting Nietzsche. I think we should repudiate him, but he has a few insights, right? So
right, yeah,
he notes in Thoughts Out of Season that he doesn't see the orthodox eschatology, or he rejects it. Either way, he doesn't see that. But when we had all this dispensationalism going back to Joachim of Fiore and all this Chiliasm coming out, the way he saw European history was 2,000 years of waiting for the second coming, trying to make
that's
it come
right.
in. So he says about Hegel, he doesn't even care about what his presuppositions in philosophy is, even though Hegel says don't identify with history. Nietzsche treats it in like, one of his, I forget what he says. You know how he always says stuff in about one sentence. but,
Yeah, yeah.
but, that 2,000 years of us waiting for the apocalypse, that it was inevitable that we would try to act out as the historical force, and that Marxism
That's
was
right.
coming out of
Right.
this.
And it's also interesting with Nietzsche, not to get too tangential, but Nietzsche characterized Darwinism as a Hegelian innovation. And
Yes.
if you look at Darwinism, Darwinism presents the same collision of binary oppositions, where with Manichaeanism, Calvinism, what have you. You have
Hinduism, Greek ideas,
yeah,
Greek mythology, and stuff like
yeah,
Sargon coming out of the water.
yeah. You have the partitioning off with those systems of humanity into the elect and the damned, these immutable soteriological categories of the elect and the damned. With Darwinism, you have the partitioning off of humanity into the categories of the fit and the unfit,
Yes,
which are
and as they try to account for that now, we'll have to come back to where you're at because this is 19th century stuff. But if you want to debate
right,
modern evolutionists too, they're incorporating degeneracy,
right,
and they're
exactly,
also trying to account for love too and agape, and having to move into new, more philosophically sophisticated epistemologies that can try to
right,
account for love because we're also a communal creature too. But then you end up back at monism, and you still have to
right,
account for the competition and the violence still. So you end up in a
right,
dialectical system. But
right.
if you pointed out, this was something I really wanted to get into, is how much this evolutionary theory, especially 19th century evolutionary theory, this Hegelian idea, and all this Prussianism comes in. There's like the whole of the writing is almost a call for blood and warfare. The
It
Napoleonic
is.
idea that Nietzsche is infatuated with.
Exactly. Well, on the Darwinian view, and you had after a while the rise of Darwinian, what have been referred to as Darwinian militarist. On the Darwinian view, war is desirable because war makes the destroyers vary. It results in greater and greater variation. It results in the eradication of the unfit and gives rise
Yes.
to new categories of the fit. And of course, who draws upon Darwin? None other than Karl Marx, who was also drawing from Hegel. Karl Marx believed that
I hear, gave up his faith when he encountered Darwin.
that's right, and Marx believed that the war of all against all, this Hobbesian war of all against all within nature, that was posited by Darwin, was a scientific affirmation of his dialectic of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. It was basically evolutionary. It was evolutionary
Yeah.
struggle being played out in a socio political context.
And then
But
hierarchy, the benefits of hierarchy and people being on top of it are also the demiurge.
right,
But
yeah,
in
exactly,
evolutionary theory, you're even seeing this with like Brett Weinstein. The evolution is something that has to be overcome. With
yeah,
neoconservatism, the external threats all have to be overcome, and you have to spread the Americanism all over the world, and then we can finally be safe from everything. So there's a
right,
rejection of this religious idea that we have, and even the Stoics, I think, if it with Logos Spermaticae, you know, understood this part of God, and reality that you have to accept some danger and suffering and be okay with it. But we've moved into this mode where we have to be kept safe from everything, but it also fulfills a meaning structure, a desire to have victory and to be manly. Like you've been turned into an economic conscript with kind of a football team to cheer for our military overseas.
right.
We can't admit in neoconservatism if you're anti-American if you admit constraints. And I think like Dr. Thomas Sowell, I think, was looking at the Gnostic dichotomy when he saw this constrained and unconstrained vision. But when it comes to American militarism and the spending it requires and how much it empowers the left and it empowers the anti-war left when they see all the propaganda and gets these people elected, like there's no admission of constraints there.
No, 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 none whatsoever. And interestingly enough, so you know, this I think this brings us, right. This brings us now to the doorstep of neoconservatism, the Gnostic political religion of Marxism, which of course was disseminated on the popular level as communism, assumed a myriad of forms, differing interpretations of disparate theoreticians. Among those theoreticians was none other than Leon Trotsky,
Yes.
who spawned intellectual
Yeah.
tradition of
thinkers like Max Shachtman and James Burnham. And in turn, these thinkers influenced the older generations of neoconservatisms. Echoes of Trotskyist thought are faintly discernible with the neocon concept of the global democratic revolution, which really amounts to the Trotskyist Fourth International's dream of permanent revolution. Additionally, Michael Novak and other neocons, they promote the economic determinist contention that liberal democracy is a secondary effect of capitalism. And this idea is really a variant of Marxism, where entrepreneurs supplant proletarians as the champions of history.
And that's a great insight you've had too, is this entrepreneurial class instead of the proletariat.
Right. Yeah.
And we see that coming to a head now. Your Bezos, your Musk, and then when you get this vitalist backlash, you get a vitalist backlash to it. I think this also goes back to the militarism, because I think modern man feels very unmanned in the modernity, even back during the Industrial Revolution. And I think rather than sit in the factory, there's a call to war, to some kind of higher reality, and that's almost seen as a way to get close to God. I think I felt a degenerate and dumb version of that when I signed up to go to the Iraq War when I was a young man, was to experience something real, because I thought this whole society was bullshit, and it was definitely kind of pathological.
Well, there are certain social commentators of a conservative bent that literally hold that a man is not a man unless he's been in military service, unless he's been, part of the armed services. I hear it a lot, whether I'm on Rumble or BitChute or one of the more conservative leaning,
when I worked in newspapers, my first editor, the first editor of the newspaper for which I worked, laid claim to a conservative worldview and a conservative tradition. Of course, conservative, that description is relatively elastic.
Yes.
I mean, you're right wing, but you're right wing relative to what? Right? You're more right wing relative to where the radical left is positioned.
You hear the center left complain about this all the time, that they're called far right.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Jordan Peterson's like, no, I'm a liberal.
No, I'm a liberal. Yeah, I'm more so a liberal. I'm not right wing.
But they call him a Nazi.
Right? Yeah.
They take like Umberto Eco definitions of what anything that's not Marxist is a fascist.
Right. Exactly. With Nazism, what is Nazi? What was Nazism? It was just a Marxist heresy. It was nothing more. It was another competing school of socialism. They were National Socialists.
Yes.
They were just situated a little to the right of where the radical left was at the time.
And when Hitler is losing in his bunker, he says he leaves the Eastern nation will inherit the world, the stronger Eastern nation. It's like he's leaving his inheritance to somebody.
Well, and allegedly in a conversation with Hermann Rauschning, allegedly Adolf Hitler said that the whole of National Socialism was based on Marx. He's,
so we're seeing an abiding side effect here. This is something we are touching on here.
Hitler also drew from the Protocols of Zion that looked almost like a plagiarism of Weishaupt, because those ideas were in circulation.
Yeah.
So I think this is important to talk about too in a nuanced manner, because it ties to neoconservatism, and the refusal to talk about this leads to people who are complete anti-Semites having a very powerful talking platform.
Right. My take on it, my read, and it could be wrong, and there are other people that probably have different reads on it, different interpretations, but it seems to me that the learned elders of the protocols are actually the product of Juliana Glinka with certain people of the
how do you spell that?
Juliana Glinka?
Yes.
And all. It's Uliana, and I think it's Glinka. Yeah, is Glnka. She was spoken about in a book, and I'm not recalling the name right offhand, but it's It was a book. It was the occult underworld or the occult underground, something to that effect. But like I think it was a product of her, backed by certain elements of the Okhrana, the Tsarist secret police, and it was basically a way of of manipulating the czars into believing that the cause of all their ills were Russian Jews, and it was a case of misdirection, and all.
Yeah.
But she was a Russian occultist, and she was in a really prominent family. Her grandfather was a colonel, in the military and all, and they were just steeped in anti-Semitism and theosophy
Right.
and all. So, but something that we're touching on here that I think is important is that we're seeing the abiding side effects of something, a phenomenon during the Cold War, that left of center critics and left of center researchers don't get, and all, where these elements that are on the right are described as, they're characterized as anti-communist. They aren't anti-communist, they're anti-Soviet. And there is a
Yes.
difference there. There is a distinction that must be made. I mean, you brought up earlier the Koch brothers. Well, I know that the Koch brothers, their father, Fred Koch, had worked for Stalin, and then he came to reject Stalin. And so, I mean, so what did he do? Did
And you
he,
have this whole Sutton premise too, where and Trotsky, we were just talking about getting into how the neocons really took over. I mean,
yeah,
he was funded by the Western Anglo-Atlanticists. We used
right.
Trotsky and Lenin, and it wasn't just us. You also had ties to the Swiss and the old money over in England and Europe. But we sent him there with got what 5 million in gold bullion back then to arm them,
Yeah.
and Trotsky left with a passport. I forget which one of the elites have it in their letters, talking about how splendidly it worked.
Oh, I forget how much it was, $20,000. I mean, like, he had an ungodly amount of money when he was stopped in Halifax, Nova Scotia by Canadian authorities. And while he was in New York, he was one of those very small minority of people there that had an actual, I believe it was a refrigerator. Most people didn't have one back then and all. But like, again, with the Koch brothers, I know Fred Koch, he built up the refineries in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
He worked on Stalin's the first of his 5-year plans and all, and then he seemed to utterly reject this stuff. But did he head in a kind of conservative trajectory so much? Not, or did he more so head? Did he almost more so take sides in the love spat that was taking place, between Trotsky and Stalin? That's what it looks more like. Is that he chose simply choosing the Trotskyist camp over the Stalinist camp,
Right.
and all. So, and the Stalinists were anti-Soviet. They weren't anti-communist.
I think also one of the problems, and this is one of the reasons why the left fails to identify neoconservatism as the derivation of Marxism that it is, and as a Gnostic political religion. One of the reasons being is the lexicology. There's a kind of a terminological camouflage in neoconservative theory and neoconservative thinking. For instance, neoconservatives typically express an animus towards globalism and towards world government, concepts of world government, towards notions of a one world state, but what do they advance as an alternative to that? Well, they advance Pax Americana,
Yeah.
a unilaterally initiated empire.
Well, a unilaterally initiated empire is nothing more than a unilaterally initiated form of world government. That's all it
Yes, and
is.
they thought that was inevitable. And I want to ask you a question about this too with the communism, because you talked about William Buckley having written, instead of being at the individual level of the individual, each according to his means and to his needs, he moves it to the nation state and puts them kind of on
Yeah,
on an international welfare state.
yeah. He federalizes redistribution schemes. If you read what he's written, and yeah, but because of the way that he tailors it, you're not you. It's not as easy to detect the scent of Marxism there. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, of course, William F. Buckley, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he find himself within the orbit of Skull and Bones
Yeah,
as well?
Dyer brought up too that he was knighted over over
Yes.
in England, and he was a
Yeah.
CIA operative. And if you look
Oh
at
God,
Operation
that man.
Mockingbird, that was
Yeah,
trying
that
to
man.
get we were trying to get rid when McCarthy, we went into McCarthyism. He was trying to get rid of all these British Fabians that were permeating our intelligence community,
Right, exactly.
but the
Yeah,
media
that
beat him.
man. Yeah, that man had just an enormous love affair with the CIA. But given the fact that he was within that particular something that I'd like to point out there, though, also is that the Soviet defector Anatoly Golitsyn sought assistance from William F. Buckley Jr. so that he was hoping that he would help him publish his book New Lies for Old, and Buckley turned him down. And the reason for that was not because it wasn't because Anatoly Golitsyn was accurately forecasting a fake death of communism and all. What Anatoly Golitsyn he was identifying a very real political phenomenon, but the hermeneutic that was applied was all messed up. He believed that what he was seeing was false liberalization hiding communism so that communism could come back one day and there would be a neo-communist empire in Russia, a kind of rebirth of Sovietism and all. In fact, what he was seeing was a kind of cosmetic liberalization campaign that was hiding the colonization of Russia by predatory capitalists here, and that whole process was backed by the Trotskyites here and by the neoconservatives here, who actually kind of revered Andrei Sakharov over oh, I can't think of his name, Alexander Solzhenitsyn,
Yes.
and all. They saw Sakharov's vision for a post-Soviet Russia as much more as much more acceptable than what Solzhenitsyn wanted. Solzhenitsyn wanted a return of Christian civilization,
Yes.
whereas Sakharov wanted this almost kind of Trotskyite humanist republic and all. If you read his writings very carefully, you see a veneration of technocracy
That's
there.
what I was going to say. Yeah, Sakharov. There's strong technocratic undercurrents in his work.
But it's my assertion that the reason that Buckley did not want to help Anatoly Golitsyn is because anybody reading Golitsyn's book, New Lies for Old, with discernment would see that what Golitsyn was actually seeing was a plan to seize control and colonize Russia, and that plan included the neoconservatives like Buckley.
Right.
Yeah, and you see that
But
with the fifth column, and when we installed Yeltsin,
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
that's part of the reason we got Putin.
Yeah, yeah.
'Cause he
Well, this easily drunk, malleable because he was seldom sober guy, and all, who was also somebody that they could blackmail because They were claiming that he was shaving money off of IMF loans and whatnot and all. And they didn't have that kind of dirt
You end
on
up
Putin.
with something else too that these neocons don't get when it comes to belief. Like you talked about with Vietnam, you can't the qualitative aspect. They completely ignored what it means to humiliate a people.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, Thucydides understood that was a reason for the Peloponnesian War.
right,
But
absolutely.
when we get into this kind of idea that everything's billiard balls and you can just manipulate things, like you can't account for how much people hate
But
being humiliated. I
no,
mean,
but
we have certain nefarious dialecticians that will do it on purpose for demoralization,
right.
and they don't care who wins because they'll just corruptly join whoever. Like some of these
Well,
people will be pro-Zionist, I think, and if the Nazis actually win, they would turn Nazi, and vice versa. Like some of these people don't care, but they
right. Well,
most
I think
most of the people don't, especially when it gets to the mainstream and we start thinking about what we can force upon the rest of the world. They don't.
yeah,
People don't like being humiliated.
right, absolutely. But I think that the neoconservatives couldn't help but do it because one thing they hold in common with their Eastern liberal establishment counterparts is a kind of uh, Ruskin, Ruskin, Milner, Rhodes, British race patriotism. And a centerpiece of that race patriotism is anti-Slavic rhetoric. They absolutely, I mean, like
Yeah,
they just absolutely
and
hate the
that's there in
Slav.
Quigley too.
And yeah, yeah. And so if you look, I mean, like if there are certain people out there that if you read today, J.R. Nyquist or any of the pundits on Fox News and all, the Russian people, those Slavic people, are regarded as a permanent enemy. They'll
Yes,
never,
and they look at
they'll,
orthodoxy like this too, as though it's the same as this communist enemy somehow.
yeah, yeah.
Even
You
though
know,
we,
and
we wanted to, we sent we helped. I don't want to say we were completely responsible for the communism. I mean, I'm going to take St. John Kronstadt a little bit higher when he tells the Russian people to repent, and then when the contemporary saints say we're headed in the same direction now, that's probably the more important thing. But we did
yeah,
want to get rid of real traditionalism and take out monarchy.
right. Right. But I know that with Orthodoxy, it is seen as a permanent quote unquote collaborationist structure over there. It's owned, bought, and and paid for by the KGB and by the KGB's forerunner, the FSB. It's
Yeah,
owned by the state. That's the way that they're all. I mean, like they'll even
there's no conception that even when there were corrupt church and state Kaiseropapisms and Philotisms and every
yeah,
other heresy like Saint Maximus the Confessor faced, like we've always had the saints that have kept the true church alive. We've had the Catacombs Church when Russia was in charge, when Stalin was in
yeah,
charge of the Sergian Church.
yeah,
But
yeah.
we don't have anything like that here, and it's very hypocritical because this neoconservatism has co-opted a fake and dilute, and I think sometimes too small but very energetic, clinging and backwards attempts to reassert a real Christianity. I can be sympathetic to the fundamentalists there when they're
Yeah,
what they're
it's what
backlashing against, but they've been trying to use their own controlled version of Christianity here that's led to so much atheism that
right.
can't
It's what
actually defend itself the way orthodoxy can, and is winning now that at least in the conversation space it's winning because it can defend itself. But they don't want to lose this kind of neocon, Christianity, neocon Christian
right.
conservatism that they've used. I mean, the CIA up-leveled Billy Graham and other evangelicals. Well, at the
Yeah,
same time, the Rockefellers pushed liberal evolutionist type theology into the divinity schools
that's right. That's right. Absolutely.
and a dialectic. Like
Right.
and
Exactly.
Vietnam too. These guys were useful for Vietnam, and right now there's multi-million-dollar ads for John Hagee on Fox News.
Yeah. I
So
know that.
the
I feel for evangelical America in this respect. Going back to what you were saying, I mean, when you have all these dominionists and you were born in America, you were raised in the American milieu, and that includes its religious landscape, which is which is basically defined as kind of as something out of Protestantism, although like it's kind of far and removed even from the Reformed theology that we would know of Calvin and Luther. And when that's all you've known, and you don't know anything about any of the apostolic communions, you've never heard anything about Orthodoxy. You've never heard anything. You might have heard. You might have seen the Anglican Church when you watched a royal wedding. You
Yeah.
know, you know about Catholicism because you used to watch the Pope give a Christmas address every year, but that was about it. That's just a dude with a funny hat to you, and all you know is these churches with this dominionist leaning, with this bizarre Hal Lindsey / Tim LaHaye kind of eschatology and all. Well, the only alternative you have to flee uh, to preserve your sanity is atheism, in your view,
Yes.
in your estimation.
Atheism or
And
New Age,
Right.
yeah. So yeah,
or
you feel.
apathy, or just like I'm just gonna do what I want and what. Like,
Oh yeah,
Right.
the as I call it, the monastery of the mind. I just escape into my own, world, and
Yeah, it's
I just divorce
yep,
myself from.
yeah, it's me and Jesus in my prayer closet.
yep,
And
or sports ball.
yeah.
Am I?
Yeah. But the interesting thing about this uh, this association between neoconservatism and what the left calls Christian nationalism, one of several pejoratives they've assigned it, or dominionism. Uh, First of all, dominionism and the movement within uh, Christianity that's exemplified by the likes of John Hagee and what have you. First of all, it as much as the left does not like to admit it, it shares the same sort of eschatological framework with the Amanitist eschatologies that shaped liberal and left-leaning thinking. The same sort of Amanitist eschatologies, dispensationalism.
Yes.
Dispensationalism looks no different. It looks no different from Hegel and Marx's eschatology. And that made it all the more. That made it
Singularity.
all. Yeah, that made it uh, uh, all the more compatible with the neocon scheme. But it's all directed towards the same ends, and that is, in the words of Eric Voegelin, the amanitization of the eschaton. And you see this with neoconservative writers such as Francis Fukuyama, who proclaimed the arrival of the end of history and the last
Yes, and
man.
he's lifting that from Solovyov,
Exactly.
who, and for anybody who's unaware of who Solovyov, I'm probably saying it wrong. He was a esotericist that kind of saw the errors of his ways. He was a sophiologist, and he went out and did like esoteric ceremonies in the desert for the goddess Sophia. But then he wrote his version of the end of history was the coming of the Antichrist for all this esoteric stuff and these kind of liberal and globalist ideals to bring everything together into one new way of doing things and to supplant the real religion with false one.
Right. The interesting thing is too about neocons is being just and you see this also with neoliberals who are kind of like their dialectical kissing cousins. Um, um, the neocons are just masters of projection, because one of the things they accuse Putin of is uh, advancing an humanist eschatology. They are the proponents. They are the biggest proponents of an humanist eschatology that you will ever find.
Well,
The neoconservatives. They really exaggerate the influence of Alexander Dugin
Yeah.
Putin's thought
And
and all.
they empower Alexander Dugin as well. By this Western influence, you empower Alexander Dugin.
Absolutely.
You empower
Absolutely.
some of the ecumenist tendencies with Putin to send, his priests over to the Vatican, or to say the Quran is a sacred book, because we're interfering with Islam and using our own Muslims to kill Christians over in Eastern Europe, and we did it in Kosovo. So they're going to take advantage of the fact we're spreading so much degeneracy worldwide, leapfrogging off the neoconservative policy now that it's gone completely woke and WEF. Well, they can point to us and say we're the great Satan and Antichrist.
Yeah.
And now they're flipping that. They just flipped the Chechens.
Yeah. And what is for the neocon? What is the eschaton? What is paradise? The paradise that is to come. Well, it's the same ad nauseum invoked term that we hear from the left: democracy.
Yes.
Democracy. This fetishized conception of democracy.
They give it like a metaphysical and ontological quality, like to a metaphysical concept that just this democracy thing is threatened somewhere. But what is it?
Right. Yeah, what is it? It's nebulous. It's vague. We're not even sure what its contours are, because in the interest of promoting it, you're constantly seeking to squelch it.
Well, I know that I know that Russia cannot accept the definition that we have here, because for the democratization, Western democratization, as they experienced it, was state-held monopolies being bequeathed to oligarchs.
Right.
Yes.
So it was just so what did they get? Well, more monopoly, more monopolistic structures.
But if you'll never find a statement more tinctured by Immanentist eschatology than the one made by George W. Bush. This statement pretty much says it all. He said, "Liberty is both the plan. Liberty." Being associated with democracy, liberty is both the plan of heaven for humanity and the best hope for progress here on earth. I mean, that's imbuing liberty with a soteriological quality to it.
Yeah,
and his definition of liberty isn't exact. I mean, like, freedom for a person in the ancient world was freedom to do the right thing.
Right.
Yes. That's the kind of freedom the Stoics talked about.
Right.
A man is truly free when he's ready to die. And then, that language is caught up, and we acknowledge that while we defeat the Stoics, but it's all throughout, like, the Filiokalia and everything.
It was choosing the ontological good. It was striving towards the telos. It's not the modern notion of freedom, which is emancipation from all cherished constraints.
Yeah.
Choosing, simply choosing. Choosing is the highest good in according to the modern definition of freedom. So simply having choice. So your choice between 12 different varieties of bread in a store, you can see where it comports very well with consumerism.
Yeah, if Nambla decides to get out during a pride parade and prance around with their naked buttocks in front of kids, they made a choice. Well, that's good, to them. If the definition, if the logic follows, if the rationale follows, then that's a good thing in the estimation.
And neoconservatism has kind of been progress doing the speed limit behind this, right? This idea that it's good, but as long as it can be somewhat sane, it's okay to express your authenticity as long as you're successful. So as long as you made some money and you're successful and you're on our side to help us win, and you espouse what we espouse, it's okay to be a transgender now as long as you have an M16 and you're against groomers and you say you're for family values.
Right. Well, Dave Rubin hasn't, has never, denounced his homosexuality.
He had a surrogate. Him and his husband had a surrogate who wanted to keep the kid, and under this idea that mammon is more important because it's the lowest common denominator. Same with the Abraham Accords that can make us all get along. That takes precedent. So the contract law takes precedent over the morals that precede it. So it's okay to do this, and this is the same thing that where we're headed with transhumanism and with these globalists on the left is towards surrogacy outside the womb, the equalizing of the sexes till those
Right.
categories don't matter anymore. So you're seeing a kind of more conservative version of that. You see Jeremy Boring, the gay guy that runs the Daily Wire, with his furs flamboyant and
Yeah, absolutely.
but he's
Yeah.
successful, so it's good because you're successful.
Right. Well, neoconservatism has basically redefined original sin, or ancestral sin. They've redefined it as a failure to accept modernity. That is for them the original sin. And so if you do not accept the wholesale supplanting of traditional sexual morality with this rationally constructed new and improved iteration of sexual morality. If you do not, then you are among the damned. You have succumbed to original sin, and that's one of the reasons why the neocons have always been so avid about war with Muslims. Muslims refuse to accept modernity. Refuse to accept modernity and its definition of freedom being the emancipation from all cherished constraints. And so, if you refuse to accept modernity, now you're numbered among one of the damned.
And this has to do with what you taught with Saint Simon as well, right? Because we've moved to this utilitarian reign of quantity. So now, if you can actually do good with modernity and it gives success and power, then that's what is good.
Right. Exactly. Whatever is useful. Whatever.
Pragmatic.
Yeah, exactly. Strictly pragmatic.
But we don't understand how that's empowered pragmatism.
Right. Exactly. Right. Right.
Which most people don't understand is a different thing, but that gets into this kind of monist collectivism on the one and the many problem.
Right. Exactly. 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 Well, at any rate, so you see with neoconservatism how it was really just an outgrowth of this it was really just an outgrowth of this one of many derivations of uh, the ideational cauldron from which the power elite draws to formulate its worldview, which really amounts to not just religious syncretism, but political syncretism.
Yes, and political syncretism and the religious syncretism. And I think
exactly.
this kind of dialectic too with Islam and Zionism, because we pumped that to put our proxy there. And then one thing people don't understand too is that Stalin, when Lenin had not been so anti-Zionist, neither was Trotsky, but Stalin was anti-Zionist, so he kind of leaned into his gambit that was going on against us with the Marxists over there in Israel. But then he pulled out of it like a fate and switch. Then he dumped into the Arab world because he knew we would buy ourselves a big problem in a hostile Middle East. But then we also have our Muslims that we prop up. So we prop up these modernist Muslims, but this also drives the anti-modernist radicals. And then we use them when we see fit, then we end up fighting them. But then we take these refugees, when you see the Fabian socialists who are for social engineering, tell us to, use Islamization as a tool. A lot of them like Sufism. A lot of people don't understand the Sufic theosophy at the UN. So now we're getting all these Muslims who also are going through the apostasy rate, but after a massive birth rate here in the West. But they have a lot of the same eschatological and heretical ideas that the Protestants have. So you have a mixing bowl right now to blend these ideas together religiously. And you're seeing people look to Islam as this cure for modernity now. But it's going to blend with this Protestant neoconservatism, in my view.
Yeah.
As a warrior religion.
Yeah, the dialectical commonalities are already there to allow for a Hegelian synthesis between the two. And what you could see is as a potential, contrived opposition, controlled opposition to that is the primitivism of radical environmentalism.
Yes.
because you know
But
because
you see
justify
forms of that blend with Sufism, though, too, because they're using certain Sufi ideas that are very Neoplatonic, that are immanentized, and
yeah.
somewhat monistic, as a bridge between multiple religions. So Yale Ecology and Religion is using these Sufic thinkers at the same time they're going into Taoism, and at the same time they're also going into misappropriating some of our Christian thinkers for this kind of
Yeah.
new monism. And they have Teilhard de Chardin right there next to the Sufism
Of course.
for a globalist environmentalist religion. And this is the kind of stuff, Greta Thunberg's got her honorary degree in. And Temenos Academy, too, from Prince Charles, is very Sufic, very theosophical. They have their
And of course,
United Kingdom Theosophical Societies that are all backed by this stuff. So you see a left-wing side of this, but then you see this kind of, and then you see the pagan primitivism too that's coming to oppose it, but then you see this kind of vitalist and militant, manly, turning towards Islam and black-pilled right-wing paganism too, and Julius Evola and all this on the other side. But there's going to be a synthesis out of this.
right, right. And interestingly enough, too, I mean, ironic, it's ironic, contradictory though it may seem, environmentalism and environmentalists always gravitate towards technocracy. Now, that may seem it may seem as though the two are irreconcilable, especially since technocracy esteems industry industry and technology as the defining feature of history, that it actually is what moves history. And of course, with environmentalism, you have the desire, the impulse to deindustrialize, to impose technological apartheid upon humanity. But in actuality, it, it, they share a common dialectical commonality that brings the two together, and that dialectical commonality again is what? The rejection of a telos, the rejection of purposiveness to the universe,
and our loss of anthropology.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well,
and there's something else there too, because I think we have a natural desire for this. This would be our orthodox position towards theosis.
Right.
But I think when that gets mixed up into this Gnostic stuff, you get this desire you still want to return to God. You have this desire to return to the origin, but it's in nature. So this return to the origin is to return to your true natural state. But we understand that we have this technology, so the dialectic brings in that side of it. So the technology is going to make us what we are truly meant to be, and what our imagination would let us be. This apotheosis.
Exactly.
And the alchemists too, their perfect idea of the gold was something that was gilded, and this reflects when they bring in organic elements. So it would be like techne and nature gilding each other, and we have the correct version of that. I think in our eschatology, in the gardens that are in there in the heavenly Jerusalem. You see this technocratic version, I believe, and it shows up, centuries before. I think in the symbolism, it's returning back to just with androgyny too.
Right, absolutely. With orthodoxy, it's understood that that the earth is a cosmic cathedral that man offers back up to God.
Yes.
Okay. But the man does not venerate it as God. Saint John of Damascus, makes it clear. We do not worship matter, but we worship the God of matter,
yes,
who became matter so as to save matter. So, with the incarnation of the Logos, Jesus Christ, the Theanthropos, becoming man, he's the God man, and he, in so doing, he basically esteems matter. Matter becomes, matter, which of course was good. Because we're not Gnostics, we don't believe matter to have been evil. We don't regard materiality as a deceptive simulacrum. Matter now has now has redemptive potentials in it,
Yes.
which is why in the divine liturgy, the bread, the wine, both of which are matter, suddenly become body and blood, of Jesus Christ. You have a horrific parody of that in radical environmentalism, with its pantheism. The creation is now viewed as holding ontological parity with the creator. In fact, it has supplanted the creator.
Yeah.
And ironically, though, esteeming the creation as the creator itself, the Kazasuai universe, it doesn't dignify it anymore, because we see that with present environmentalist policies. The drive for EV cars, electrical cars, and what does it require? What does all the lithium required for these EV cars? What does it stipulate? Hollowing out entire sections of the earth.
Yes. With slave labor
mining.
of children.
Yeah, strip mining with poor Congolese children.
Right.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Another thing this does too on the neoconservative aspect of this, because I think as we start to lose this technocratic control of our society, at least, and it started to become more globalist, and this success and power that we were getting from our technology and markets is slipping away from us. I think there's a great fear, because I think that's the only thing that was really keeping it together, and that we see this environmentalist backlash that is anti-human, and there's a great horror. So there's almost sometimes a reaction that, like, with all these environmentalist hoaxes that you're seeing, we take that and multiply that on the neoconservative side to act like there's nothing bad we could do to the planet, and we should just keep pushing as much technology and industry as possible. And anybody that tells you to even eat somewhat healthy, not eat bugs, but just like stop eating 50 fish fillets a day,
Right.
it's like just some stupid liberal, who's not a man telling you what to do. So you get like this other backlash that's anti-environment and against God's world, and thinks we can just master every part of it by our own will, even if it's not technocratic. You can see how those two will play into each other, though, because they're both about man mastering the world as his own God.
Right. So basically, the way that the dialectic looks at this juncture is, on one extreme pole, you have situated the Bacon's Sir Francis Bacon's scientific humanitarianism, and then on the other extreme pole you have Rousseau's romantic humanitarianism. The key dialectical commonality between the two that ensures their Hegelian synthesis is the rejection of telos, the rejection of purposiveness to the world, to nature, to the universe, the rejection of a transcendent structure to reality, and of course of a transcendent God. And so the two will invariably gravitate towards one another, and the resulting synthesis is going to be the worst aspects of both, this hideous amalgam.
Yeah.
I
and you
think
have
that.
to understand. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I think, okay, so, one of the reasons that there's this divergence between the liberal Eastern establishment and the neoconservatives, one of the reasons there's this competition between the two is there's this disagreement on how you go about your conquest. And for liberal Eastern establishment, the power of persuasion, soft power, the use of NGOs, the use of regime change tactics that make everything appear to have been an organic change. That's the best way to go.
Kind of the George Soros school.
Yeah. And, then you have this more crass, overt kind of conflict version of conquest with the neocons. Just send in the armed services and bomb the hell out of the place. That's, and the neoliberals and the Eastern liberal establishment, that faction is, even though they are to some extent getting along with the neocons right now, I think they found in Trump and in MAGA Republicans and that kind of populism a kind of common foe that has united them for the time being. They'll be back at one another's throats eventually. Trust me there. But anyways,
and that
I think
Eastern establishment also has a media pass when they want to be neocons.
yeah.
They get to
But
they're treated like they're some kind of anti-war hippies when they go full neocon like Hillary.
yeah, but their main opposition to the neocons is that overt military conquest, they believe, leads to the rise of counter alliances, something
Right.
like the BRICS. And
They want more of this Fabian slow kill method, and they want the idea that something exists, therefore it's good. So if it's emergent, it's good. So if you just allow this to happen without saying any one overt group made it happen, you just act like it's what everybody wanted democratically, and this nebulous idea of democracy justifies it. It sanctifies it.
But my argument would be that even if they were to jettison the strategy of the neocons and kind of have this kind of subtle global imposition of their values, they would still see the rise of counter alliances because of what we were just talking about. You can detect, it's right there on the surface. It's not something that's hard to see. You can detect and see with your own eyes the rejection of logos and the rejection of telos, and all. And that's not going to set with somebody.
You're seeing that in science too, with people who might not even subscribe to these ideologies. I know Dr. McGilchrist has a really good section too that destroys older evolutionary ideas. Dyer talks about a lot, even if you get into the new cutting edge ideas on evolution, even if you call ideas that were going around for 20 years cutting edge. There's a lot of stuff that points to telos, and it's very heavily rejected. I know there was a cell scientist he destroyed cell pump theory, which was a mechanistic thing about cell walls, that they had doors that opened and closed rather than something more organic. And he was right for like a very long amount of time, and they pilloried him in science even though he was doing massive cancer and AIDS research. Gordon Ling was his name. They could not take that challenge to the mechanistic and Cartesian ideology, and it pointed to telos.
Right.
Richard Dawkins is right now talking about ancient aliens to give a justification for telos that he's seeing and he can't get around anymore. Like the new evolutionary theory is teleological, whether it's adaptive.
Yes, it is. It's irreducibly teleological.
I think, and I believe that Steve Turley has touched upon this when he's talked about, Russia becoming a new civilizational state. You would still see this opposition, especially from people in the East that have not completely rejected, their Christian past and have not rejected tradition, we'll just say. You would still see the counter alliances because they still have a grasp on logos. They still have a grasp on the idea of telos. They don't want to reject either. They don't want to reject those because they know that the alternative to that is chaos. Is kind of a slow drag into anarchy of both, not just political anarchy, moral anarchy, social anarchy.
Yes.
And so whether the conquest is carried out by using the neoconservative strategy or the neoliberal strategy, they're still going to resist.
Well, this is these countries throwing out gender studies in their schools and then having UN money withheld from them, just like this William F. Buckley plan to distribute money. It's been used to spread this ideology.
Yeah. But hiding hiding the neocons away, like putting them in the closet like they're that special cousin or something. The guy on the family tree that we all kind of just distance ourselves from. That ain't going to cut it. You're still going to have a rejection of any kind of worldview or any that rejects telos and rejects logos. So that's I mean, like, yeah, I'm absolutely sure that the in 2003 invasion of Iraq helped foster the rise of counter alliances. But I got to tell you, it was going to happen anyways.
Right.
It was invariably it would have happened.
And there's the other side of this. If it starts to happen and they start to reject us, then they require the neocons again, because they cannot give up their hegemony. And the people that released COVID and have done all this stuff and have an Epstein Island aren't going to just like come to justice and let somebody else throw them out and bring up all their records.
Yeah, well, we've seen that.
They said it's winner take all at the WEF right now. So if these people start having a counter alliance and saying no to us, then we send Ukraine into the Donbass, and then a false church over there. And if that doesn't work, they're going to want to send boots on the ground.
Yeah. What do you see in Ukraine too? You see the expunging of Orthodox Christianity.
Yep.
And
well, you got them incarcerating Orthodox priest over there.
Right.
They drafted a 67-year-old bishop into the military.
And the adoption of outright Satanism and occultism.
And like you said, they're trying to transform that into the modern equivalent of what Napoleon called his Spanish ulcer, because he would beat the snot out of the Spanish, and then they just keep coming back, and it was wearing him down, and so they hope that they hope that Ukraine would be the Putin's ulcer. Well, didn't work out that way, and it's very. I would say, for all intent and purposes, it's already over. They just haven't made it official yet. They haven't made the official announcement.
I think it's one of the reasons that if it wasn't planned and allowed on, or at least allowed on purpose, it's what they're going to take advantage of the Israel situation, in my opinion, to get back into Ukraine.
Well, I think that's how they pull Russia back in, because they want to. What will they say? Well, they'll say that Hamas and Hezbollah are proxies of Iran, and that's not necessarily untrue.
No, but we are involved in proxy warfare for a century.
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily a given that Hamas and Hezbollah were acting on Iranian orders. I think it's possible that they acted unilaterally. We haven't discerned that yet.
They do have their own agency and their own Islamist ideals that they would like to see enacted, and they've been empowered by both Russia. They've been empowered by us when we use our proxies over there, and Israel has used them for asymmetrical warfare too, and to fund them to take out PLO.
Well, yeah,
they used Hezbollah, they used Hamas, and to justify their wars.
Yeah, that was their foil to Yasser Arafat for many years. That's just the way it was, and all. So but they maybe they think that now that. But if they can bring Iran into the war, then Russia, given their commitments to Iran, they pull Russia in there and try to exhaust Russia that way. But if neither of those work and they want to take on Russia head on with, they end up following the neocon tact, which we know is that strategy is like, we'll just send the United States Armed Services against Russia and all. There's no way they can defeat us and all. Well, I hate to tell them this, that would be a complete disaster.
Yes.
Your military is full of people who were quote unquote vaccinated, so they probably have asymptomatic myocarditis,
and
which
even since Bush too, we started to see a lot of good people leave our military.
Oh, absolutely.
And the screening process for military personnel in the latter half of the second Iraq War, it was almost virtually non-existent, because they were actually recruiting gang members, white supremacists, neo-Nazis
when I was
the United States military.
When I was getting out, there was a discipline problem that went like it. misconduct multiplied like something like fivefold.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And part of that was also we were running a war basically that had no end to it
right,
and no
right.
way to actually win it, and we were just over there with car bombers and stuff coming through, and then innocent people get shot at checkpoints, and we were losing more people than when we actually had real battles like Fallujah. So the morale completely went down the tank, and like any kind of virtue, because they kind of like do instill some virtue in you. Even I think that and the identification with the heroes of the past is a stronger form of brainwashing than the other side of it. But once you're in a war that isn't virtuous and there's no point to it, the only thing you have left is to survive. And the more of the stuff that they start teaching you to break your civilian mind frame and be a killer and to not care about anything, and this kind of dark apathy and callousness kind of takes over.
Yeah, before you know it, you got kill clubs over in Afghanistan.
Yeah. And
Which
even if it doesn't go that far, it's guys that are just hate the populace and hate the military and come back all fucked up. Like,
right. And one of the problems that local law enforcement has faced here in the United States, though, is the all of a sudden you see the appearance of gang members who are actually well versed in military tactics. Well, why? Because they went and fought over in the Second Iraq War.
I mean, the whole reason they probably got into the military in the first place was to acquire a skill set.
And this has happened too during Prohibition and bank robbers and stuff after World War I. But you saw less of this when there seemed like to be a point to World War II when people had more prosperity when they came home. You saw it with the Bloods and the Crips after after Vietnam.
Yeah,
But this is cultivating this becomes our idea of masculinity too, especially with this masculinity crisis. This starts to be the ideal.
Right.
It's something much more violent.
Yeah, but I'd really like to see though the neoconservatives, realize their strategy now, because like I said, I mean, like they kicked out a huge cross section of people that were refusing those vaccines. So now you have people that are all vaccinated, but now we're having we're finally reaching that point where you can no longer hide the side effects, and you have asymptomatic myocarditis, which means that this person is not going to show any signs until there's physical exertion. And of course, there's going to be physical exertion in a kinetic war. So you probably have people dropping over and getting sick, some of them dying and everything. You have other vaccine injuries, and also they're probably not in the greatest of shape and all. But then you also
lowered the standards there.
Yeah, but then you also have the replacement of an actual skill set that's applicable to the battlefield with woke ideology and all. They know that they hate the white man. They know that white American Christian culture is the cause of all their woes. But do they know how to fly a plane? Do they know how
their pronouns? But can they?
Do they know how to?
Have you seen the new recruiting commercials?
Can they hit their targets? Yeah. They've finally decided to return to the more traditional approach with the new recruiting commercials because their recruitment numbers are awful. So there's all of a sudden their recruitment commercials are full of muscular white men who are in shape. There's not a single person in there with any purple hair or
but
they're referred to each other as Z or Zer.
Well, they're also sending out letters to unvaccinated people saying,
begging them to return.
Would you please come back? Well, if you've had that kind of resentment, do you think that you would come back?
People that were going to retire after on their fine, they had 16 years in.
So I just don't see how the neocons.
I think there's another issue here though too, where I think sometimes they don't see their limitations. One, and I also think in the idea they use proxy warfare, and I think they could use hybrid warfare where they use select troops in small numbers and then use that for war powers. During the French Revolution, after Robespierre died, they actually pushed a policy of continuing warfare and continuing bad economic policies that damaged the nation because it kept the people so down on the ground that they couldn't rise up and kill them. Because if they could, they would. So they kept them starved to death and in warfare constantly, and that was how they circumnavigated their constitution. They pushed for the warfare there. So I think some of our government doesn't care if they could win this war or not, or if it ends in disaster, as long as they gain war powers and maybe don't have to face another election.
Yeah,
and I feel like the neocons are reactivating, like this anti-war right is really reactivating neoconservatism over Israel. I don't think it worked with Ukraine, partly because even though Russia was the boogeyman, they're not communist anymore.
Right,
and it's not Israel, so you don't have this energetic evangelical base that's tied to the Zionists that we've empowered in our own government. And you don't have Islam as the boogeyman.
You don't hear an evangelical preacher saying that Ukraine is God's chosen people.
No.
That's what they say about Israel, And also you're right in that regard. But I just don't see how, the neocon dream of a kinetic war with America directly prosecuting it and directly involved is any way feasible. They do have their.
I don't see it working either. And Russia, as Colonel McGregor's talked about too, is that he's been taking Ukraine very slowly because they're moving in traditional fighting positions and setting up like real bunkers and trenches and everything, so that if we do enter into the warfare, they're prepared for it.
Right. We do have this kind of neoconservative fixation, and I guess this applies to other factions of the oligarchy here, but it's really pronounced with the neocons, a fixation with a reliance on our nuclear arsenal.
Yes.
If all else fails. But then again, going back to what did you say? You said, they're not aware of their own limitations. When was the last time that a nuclear weapon was constructed? Like 1992 was the last time that we we don't have really what you would call an up-to-date modern arsenal. So with that
infrastructure warfare, cyber warfare, like biological warfare. I mean, we're more interested on releasing a virus on ourselves out of whatever enmeshments we have in China. And that could be that could have been a probing attack. That could have been just the test run before they do a much worse one that justifies actually totalitarian methods if it's actually killing kids, like Sam Harris has called for. So this neoconservatism, I think, is also a very big double-edged sword, in my opinion, because before I even knew anything about philosophy, before I ever knew anything about religion, really, I was kind of just like getting back into politics because I had a slightly automated job, and I started to see how bad things were going. But when I went and read like even the neoconservative and neoliberal thinkers, you could see something was very wrong, and there was a disparity between like what a Thomas Sowell and an F.A. Hayek proposes and what's actually being done. And I think there's a lot of people that are, even though it's reactivating this kind of collectivism and it's so wrong, it's also so wrong in a way. I think it's a breach point too for real conservatism and real Christianity to assert itself if it could kind of kick itself into the Overton window. Man might reject that if they hear the truth, but I do think there's an opportunity for truth to be told. And you've seen the kind of return to paleoconservatism with like Tucker. You've seen people who too, I think, arrive at orthodoxy after going down a lot of rabbit holes that have cut out a lot of garbage, but they've seen a lot of facts lining up from different areas, and we can get beyond just facts and this kind of Gnostic privileging of information, but we have the information to kind of break through that in our conversation.
Absolutely. And all. Yeah, I mean, like you do have this rise of a more populist, more uncontrolled conservatism, because what happened, was that if you look at the Southern Rim, which was really one of the powers behind the neoconservatives, they rose up, by building, they amassed a fortune. These Southern Rim elites, they amassed a fortune in what were revolutionary and brand new markets at that time, shortly after World War II. Those markets were like aerospace, they were defense, it was electronics and all. That's why you see a lot of defense contractors coming out of the Southern Rim orbit and all. They also, made a lot of money off of agribusiness. They were able to build a labor base there in the Southern Rim states because the weather that was better than these coastal areas on East Coast areas, and also, just better money for those looking for it. Um, they were able to amass a labor force, and so, like, they started to build these dynasties that had the wealth and the influence to seize control over the conservative movement and take it in the direction that they wanted it to go.
Yeah.
This is where the 17th Amendment to the Constitution kind of handicaps us, because it brought the influence of money into, because before then, senators were picked by state legislatures. Well, this opened it up to direct elections, and of course, when you open things up to direct elections, you have campaign finance then come into play, and people seeking money for their election bids, and the Southern Rim were able to seize control of a lot of politicians. A lot of what could have been statesmen became politicians, became career politicians, working for the money. But the Southern Rim brought a lot of the conservative movement under their wing, basically presenting their ideas, that the frontierism, the veneration of enlightenment, to the Enlightenment ideal of progress.
Yes.
All of that, the reckless interventionism, presenting all of this stuff as an alternative to misandry, to environmentalist tyranny, to creeping immorality on the social plane. And now, with people like you said, with Tucker Carlson, or people like Steve Turley, you have a kind of pulling away from that,
and that could still go wrong, but you do see this backlash. We're at least looking at what the problems are here. And those problems you're talking about too, with the Southern Rim and the Prussianization too. One of the things I want to bring up before I got to get out of here is how William F. Buckley came in. But you can't send in an operative the way they did to take over something if the ideas aren't already there. You have to operate with what's there. You couldn't go over to the Middle East and install Mormonism, right? You can, even if you throw $200 billion at it, it's not going to work, right?
Right.
So these seeds were already here through all this philosophy we've talked about, and the historical events from the Civil War and the Revolution. But how did William F. Buckley come into National Review with Irving Kristol and set the scene for modern conservatism? And how was it different from, say, like Russell Kirk, who they kind of got rid of?
Oh yeah, he kind of started that as kind of like the flagship publication of conservatism, but something that he hid from the majority of conservatives, or I won't say hid. Let's say that it was understated, intentionally so, was that he had been with the Central Intelligence Agency. I think he had been a station chief. I believe he had been a station chief, or actually, well, but he had worked with the, no, he wasn't a station chief. I'm thinking of another Buckley that actually was killed and all. But, he had worked closely with the CIA, and what many people don't know the CIA is kind of an epicenter for the Anglophile network. All the early guys, Wild Bill Donovan, Alan Dulles, they were all unabashed, like unapologetic Anglophiles. And so so what it could be argued that what Buckley was doing was scoring a covert conquest of the conservative movement for the very Eastern liberal establishment minions that they espoused a hatred for. And although I would say, like in some respects, it pulled away and found more appeal and more support among the Southern Rim guys. But I mean, like, I remember Buckley. He even gave I mean, explicitly so, his approval of CIA assassination programs that took place under Ted Shackley. And so with that, all of a sudden, the anti-interventionism of the traditional conservative stripe was gone.
Right.
So it's a long drawn out story, and like I said, Anatoly Golitsyn had asked him for assistance in publishing the book New Lies for Old, and he didn't help at all with that. And the reason that I believe that was because I mean, Anatoly Golitsyn he was identifying a very real political trend over there. He was seeing a very real phenomenon. He was just misunderstanding it as being some kind of fake death, that communism was faking its death in Russia with the intentions of coming back and all. And that's what the whole false liberalization campaign was for, and that's what the cosmetic changes were for. And all. Well, he was identifying again a real trend, a real phenomenon, and all. But the hermeneutics that he was applying just did not fit what was all of that false liberalization, all of the cosmic changes, all of the loosening of the laws, and the supposed decentralization was in fact a cover for colonization of the East, Russia in particular, and to some extent the former Soviet satellites, and all by forces here in the West that included Buckley's neocon friends. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a good summary too. And then we get into the Bush doctrine. Reagan too, you talked about, was amenable to the FDR policies that have been installed. So we're already on something that isn't America anymore. And one of the things you brought up too was that this philosophy with these evolutionist suppositions ends up in perpetual warfare for perpetual evolution. So we have to actually do something, whether it's warfare, whether it's the dialectics where it's become a psychological warfare. Something has to be done to transcend this evolutionary supposition when you have these dialectical premises. And what does this lead us to?
It's hard to, because the book, like hard.
You're cutting out pretty good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It's kind of hard to do because I know that there's and we in our book, from Dark Hitler, which was written by Richard Ward.
You're really garbled.
Can you?
No. Why don't we do this anyways? Because I only really have 5 minutes left before I got to get ready for work, and we could just close out and then continue another time and get into the panopticon singularity,
Gotcha.
and also into transhumanism and UFOs.
I look to the UFOs. Yeah, able to me.
Excellent, excellent. I think this is a good talk. We lost about 10 minutes at the beginning because I suck at streaming and I'm just getting started, but I think it went pretty good. I look forward to another one. Thanks a lot for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to another talk. Have a good one. Bye.